There is something I've been thinking about lately. One of the first places where we learn anything about life is where we are, and it's right in front of us. It's our family. And I don't mean family as an institution, I mean the people we grow up with, live with, laugh with, argue with, forgive, and sometimes drive us completely crazy. Because family is where we first learn what love feels like, or the lack of it. And it makes us what we are. It also teaches us patience and tolerance and forgiveness, and occasionally how to say sorry, even when you know you're absolutely convinced, absolutely sure that you were right, but you still say sorry. I've always felt that one of the most important things I could give my children was the freedom to be themselves. I never wanted them to become a copy of me, God forbid. Or why should they? They have their minds of their own personalities, their own journeys. And truth to tell, actually, I've learned a great deal from them. We sometimes imagine that wisdom travels in one direction, from parent to children, but it doesn't. Our children teach us too. They introduce us to new ways of looking at the world. They question our assumptions. Sometimes they make us realize that something we thought was absolutely important really wasn't. And sometimes our children simply teach us to lighten up. I've learned a great deal from my children, as well as my niece, my nephews, the whole gang. Not just about the world they're growing in, but about myself. They question things I take for granted. They see things differently. They introduce me to ideas, attitudes, and way of looking at life that belong to their generation. And sometimes, even without realizing it, they make me look at something familiar with completely new eyes. That's a gift to cherish. You can also learn a lot from your partner. I think that is true of most marriages. We sometimes talk about the husband teaching the wife or the wife teaching the husband as though one person is supposed to be the teacher and the other student. But real life, believe me, isn't like that. A marriage is more like two people walking together and constantly discovering things along the way. Sometimes one leads, sometimes the other does. Sometimes one sees something the other has completely missed. And the wonderful thing is that you don't have to agree about everything to learn from each other. In fact, sometimes it is precisely because you're different that you learn. I learned a lot from my parents too. When you're young, you tend to think of your parents as people who know everything. They teach you how to behave, how to survive, what is right and wrong, what to be careful about. But as you grow older, something rather beautiful happens. You begin to realize that your parents were learning too. They were figuring out life as they went along, just as we are. And then at some point, you realize that they have learned things from you as well. And perhaps not the things you consciously set out to teach them, but simply by being their child, by bringing a different generation, a different perspective, and different way of seeing the world into their lives. So the movement of wisdom within a family isn't from older to younger. It moves in every direction. Parents learn from children, children learn from parents, husbands learn from wives, wives learn from husbands, brothers learn from sisters, sisters learn from brothers, and grandparents learn from the grandchildren. And most often, the youngest person in the home says something that everybody stops and thinks. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So, age is not a barrier in a family. And that to me is the beauty of a family. And perhaps we have lost something of that idea today because we live in an age of the nuclear family, parents and children living in their own homes, often far from their grandparents, uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters. Of course, there are many reasons why life has evolved this way. Work takes us to different cities and countries. Children grow up and build lives of their own. Families become scattered across the world. But family itself hasn't become smaller. We simply started thinking of it as something smaller because family is much more than the people who share your house. It is everyone with whom you share a bond of affection, responsibility, memory, and belonging. I was fortunate to experience something of this when I was growing up. There was a time when living as one family meant having parents around, a brother and his family, children, cousins, and other relatives, all part of the same everyday life. It wasn't always quiet, it wasn't always orderly, and I'm sure there were plenty of arguments, but there was life everywhere. Someone was always coming in, someone was always going out, children were running around. There was conversation, laughter, teasing, disagreement, food being shared, stories being told. There were elders to turn to, children to look after, brothers and sisters to argue and make up with. You never really feel alone. And looking back, I realized what a wonderful education that was. You learn to accommodate other people. You learn to you learn that the world didn't revolve around you. You learn to share. You learn that different people have different temperaments. You learn that the older person may have wisdom you don't possess, while a child may have freshness you have lost. And most importantly, you learn that life is richer when it is shared. And that's why I remember the kind of extended family life with such affection. I mean, it wasn't always perfect. I mean, no family is. But there was a sense of belonging. You knew that there were people around you who'd celebrate with you when you were good and stand with you when things weren't. And that's why what we mean when we talk about family values, not rules, not obedience, not forcing everyone to think alike, but the simple understanding that we belong to each other, to one another. And once you understand that, the idea of a family begins to expand. The family isn't just people related to us by blood. It includes the people who entered our lives and touched us in some meaningful way. And if we take that idea one step further, family can include the life around us. Your pets, the dog sleeping beside you, the birds nestling in the trees themselves, the plants in our garden, the insects and butterflies, the soil beneath our feet, the air we breathe, the rain that sustains us. Because what are we really without all these things? We don't simply live in nature, we are an integral part of it. And perhaps that is why the idea of the family life, the family of life, becomes something much bigger, much broader. The family begins with those closest to us, it expands to everyone we are connected with, then to the living world around us, and ultimately to the earth itself. Think about it. And beyond the earth, to the cosmos. Maybe the deepest meaning of a family is not simply who belongs to us, it is the realization that we belong to something much bigger than ourselves. And perhaps that's where real spirituality begins. And that's what I think a family should be. Not a hierarchy where one person has all the answers and everyone else has to listen, but a little community where we keep learning from one another, where love goes both ways and compassion goes both ways. I think this is particularly important today because we live in a world that constantly tells us to complete. Be better, be richer, be more successful, have a bigger house, a better car, more followers, more likes, more of everything. But family can remind us of something wonderfully simple. You don't have to achieve anything to deserve love. You're loved because you are you. And that is one of the most important things a human being can learn. Now, when I say family, I don't mean people living under one roof. Family is much larger than that. Brothers and sisters, parents and grandparents, uncles and aunts, cousins, nephews and nieces, people who may not even live particularly close to us anymore. And sometimes there are people who aren't even related to us by blood, but who have become family because of the love and the history we share. These relationships can be messy, of course. Let's not dramatize it. There's nothing romantic about it. Families argue, families misunderstand each other. There can be jealousy, old wounds, differences of opinion, and things that happened 20 years ago that somebody's still keeping score of. We are human beings after all. And that's exactly why family is such an important spiritual tool. It gives us an opportunity to practice love when love isn't particularly easy. It's easy to be compassionate towards someone we hardly know. It can be much harder when it is your brother who has annoyed you 100 times, or your sister who sees the world completely different from you, or a relative who said something years ago that you still haven't forgotten. You're carrying that albatross tied around your neck. Family gives us a chance to ask, can I disagree with you and still love you? Can I forgive you? Can I apologize? Can I let go? Can I accept that you are not going to become the person I want you to be? And most importantly, can I allow you to be yourself? And there is another way I've come to think about family. It has to do with the place we call home. Because home isn't just the wall of your house. There may be a dog sleeping somewhere nearby, a cat wandering in the yard, bird nestling in the trees, butterflies visiting the flowers, a mango tree giving shade, plants growing quietly, asking for nothing except water and sunlight. There may be ants going about their mysterious business, squirrels jumping from branch to branch, and creatures all over we hardly notice at all. Are they really outside our family? We simply made the definition of family too small. For me, family can mean the whole living environment in which we exist: the home, the garden, the trees, the plants, the birds, the animals, the soil beneath my feet, the air we breathe, the rain that falls on the roof, everything that shares that little piece of earth with us. And once you begin to look at life that way, something changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who merely lives in an environment. You begin to realize that you're part of it. The tree outside my window isn't just scenery, it is alive. The birds nestling in it aren't just decoration, they have their own lives. The dog beside me is sleeping. He isn't just a pet, he's another living being with whom I share my life. And the more closely you observe the natural world, the harder it becomes to maintain the illusion that we are separate from it. We breathe what the trees help create. Think about it. We eat what the earth produces. We drink water that has traveled through an ancient cycle of clouds, rivers, soils, and oceans. The elements in our bodies once were once part of stars, planets, rocks, plants, and countless other living things. And I don't want to suggest that blood relations don't matter. Not really, they do. There is something quite special about knowing that another person carries a part of the same family history that you do. You may share grandparents' stories, childhood memories, family habits, even little things about the way you speak or behave that you recognize in each other. There is a connection that goes beyond explanation. But I have also come to realize that blood is only one part of what makes a family. You can have someone who is very closely related to you by blood yet feel almost like a stranger to them. And there can be someone who is much more distant related, perhaps someone you don't meet very often, with whom you discover an extraordinary sense of closeness. It's something I have experienced myself. There are people in my extended family who may not be particularly close to me in terms of blood relationship, but with whom I share a great deal. We can talk, we can laugh, we can discuss life, ideas, our experiences, our hopes, and our disappointments. There is an ease in that relationship. You don't have to explain too much. That's a kind of recognition. And when you realize that family isn't always about how many degrees of blood separates two people, it's about the bond that develops between them. Sometimes you meet a distant relative after many years and discover that you have far more in common than you expected. And sometimes you can live under the same roof with someone who is very closely related to you and still find that you don't really know each other. That's life. Relationships are complicated, and I think we should be more careful about reducing family to a family tree. A family tree can tell you who you're related to, it cannot tell you with whom you will love. It cannot tell you whom you will trust. It cannot tell you who will be there when you need someone. Those things are built through life, through conversations, through shared experiences, through showing up for one another, through laughter, and sometimes through difficult moments, through forgiveness, through simply being there. So, yes, blood matters. It gives us roots, it gives us history, it gives us a sense of where we came from. But belonging is something we create. And that is why the family keeps expanding as we grow older. So, where exactly does me and the rest of existence begin? This is where this becomes interesting from a Gnostic point of view. I'm back talking about Gnosticism because Gnosis is often understood as a journey of discovering the deeper truth of we are. And one of those truths is that the separate self we defend so fiercely isn't the whole story. There is something deeper, something that connects us. We are not isolated being dropped into an alien universe. We are participants in something much larger. We are part of the Earth. And the Earth is part of the solar system. The solar system is part of the galaxy. And the galaxy is part of our cosmos. Beyond anything our minds can comprehend. So, becoming conscious isn't simply about discovering who I am, it's also about discovering what I am part of. And that changes the way we live. If a tree can become part of my larger family, I cannot simply destroy it. I have to tend to it. If a bird is part of my larger family, I cannot treat its habitat as meaningless. If the animal beside me is part of my larger family, I cannot see it merely as a possession. If another human being is part of my larger family, I should think twice before treating them with cruelty or with anger. And suddenly, love and compassion are no longer mere nice moral qualities, they become a way of understanding reality. That's why I think family values matter. Not because families should produce obedient children, not because everyone must believe the same things, but certainly not because tradition should never be questioned. I want my children to question, I want them to think, I want them to be themselves, but I also want them to carry something with them wherever they go. Love, compassion, respect for life, curiosity, and a sense that they belong to something larger than themselves. Because if there is something divine within us, something deeper and more luminous than the identities we have acquired from the world, we discover it not by escaping life, but by becoming more deeply connected to it, more spiritually. And spirituality doesn't begin when we close our eyes, meditate. It begins when we open our eyes, when we look at the person sitting across the dinner table, when we listen to our children, when we learn from our partner, when we forgive our brother, when we call an aunt, uncle and aunt, keep in touch, when we make peace with a relative, when we sit quietly under a tree, when we notice the birds nestling above us, when we stroke the head of the animal lying beside us, when we realize that the soil beneath our feet, the air in our lungs, and the stars above our heads are all part of the same extraordinary story. This is what it means to come home, not simply to our house, not simply to our family, but to the living world, and beyond that, to the cosmos itself. Maybe the journey of Gnosis is ultimately a journey from separation to belonging, from I'm alone to I'm part of this. And in that realization, we discover something very simple. We were never separate to begin with. We're all one. Thank you.